Hello, I'm Troy Abels from Hanford, California, and you are listening to Gospel Tangents.
The best source for Mormon history, science, and theology, and first daily Mormon history podcast. I'm Rick Bennett. I'm excited to continue our conversation with TikTok star and punk rock polygamist Moroni Jessop. We'll continue our conversation and find out how Moroni got into the independent fundamentalist world. I'm also excited to talk about the Third Convention. This was a group in Mexico that actually broke off from the LDS Church and were able to be reabsorbed a few decades later. So we'll talk a little bit about that with Moroni. We'll also talk about his joining the Apostolic United Brethren, which is Cody Brown's group of sister wives. So you won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out.
One of the first things that I noticed, though, I really enjoyed my time with the independents. These were people that didn't belong to the FLDS.
People like Ann Wild, probably.
Yeah, people like Ann Wild.
Did you know her back then?
No, I just basically barely met Ann Wild last year at Sunstone.
Oh, you're kidding?
Yeah.
Wow.
My parents knew her. My parents knew Ogden Kraut. But myself, I had never met her until last year. I never met Ogden Kraut either. Although he lived long enough that I could have if I had had the opportunity.
Yeah, he died in around 2000?
2003, 2002.
Yeah, okay.
2002.
Okay.
Because he actually died just about like a month after my dad died.
Oh, so that's why it's easy to remember.
Yeah. My time with the independents was, like I said, the independents are not FLDS, they're not AUB, they didn't join any of the groups, and they basically will meet as families in their own living rooms to hold meetings, to hold Sunday school, to discuss the gospel, study the scriptures, and however, one of the things that I noticed right away was that there was a lot of deep-rooted racism with them. And that was kind of odd for me. I had never really experienced racism growing up in Arizona. I mean, I knew it existed, but I had never been exposed to it or seen it directly until I moved to Utah, of all places, And I recall that I was going to Salt Lake Community College, and there was an independent girl that was giving me rides.
Really?
Between the campus back to my home after school. So we would wait out at her car, and I remember that there was one other fundamentalist girl that was going to get a ride with us. And so we're waiting at her car for her to get out of class. And she says, "Oh, so you're from Arizona, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And she says, "Are there a lot of Mexicans there?" And I said, "Yeah." Yeah, you can see where this is going. And she said, "Oh, how can you stand that?"
No way. That's terrible.
And I just kind of said, "Well, I can stand it because I am one." And she kind of stumbled through her words, but I had never really encountered that.
Because your middle name is?
Lopez.
She didn't know that apparently.
Apparently she didn't. I don't know why she didn't, but maybe because I was a fundamentalist, she just made assumptions. But that wasn't the only incident. There was a lot like that.
So not just prejudice against blacks, prejudice against Mexicans too.
Prejudice against other races.
Any non-whites.
Yeah, against Polynesians, we know that they have identified specifically those of African heritage as those that couldn't hold the priesthood. The independents believed that even the Polynesians were included in that particular curse. I don't like using that word, but that's the word that they use, the curse of Cain. And so, I didn't know any better. Who was I to argue that or dispute that? I knew independents who wouldn't even shake the hands of a black man, wouldn't eat food that was prepared by a black person. It was on a next level, and it disturbed me And I didn't know really what to think about it back then, because I felt like I had found the truth with fundamentalism, and yet there's this glaring racism, And I remember that I got really discouraged one night. My parents at this point were still living in Arizona, and I was living with my brother at the home of my uncle in Utah. And I called my mother up and I said, my Mexican mother, I called her up and I said, "You're not going to like it here."
Yeah.
And she said, "Why not?" I said, "They don't like Mexicans," And I was just fell down. And at that point, my younger brother, who's only 2 years younger with me, and he was younger than me, and he was on this journey with me. He and I had moved to Utah together. And he was working at one of the fundamentalists-owned businesses. Some of the people that were former FLDS owned a medical, they manufacture medical equipment. And they're former FLDS owned, but they hire all the fundamentalists from all the different groups. So a lot of them work there. And my younger brother met a woman who was from the AUB, and they were just in idle conversation one day, and he told her that my parents felt alone in Arizona, being the only fundamentalists that they knew there. And so she chuckled and she said, "Alone in Arizona? Your parents aren't alone in Arizona." So she told them about an AUB congregation that was in Arizona, down there in the Phoenix area. And they were all Mexican.
Oh.
So the AUB has a colony down in central Mexico called Ozumba. And one of these times we may have to have a whole conversation about the history of how those people got there. And
is this like third convention stuff?
Third convention, exactly.
Okay.
You probably already had somebody on here who's talking
No,
about
I'm trying to get Tom Murphy on, but I haven't talked about third convention, so we can go there, although this might be a 10-hour interview.
I think that Tom Murphy would be more qualified to speak on it because he's done research, like actual research down on Ozumba.
Yeah.
But just in a nutshell, the people in Ozumba, all right, so basically there came a time period around the turn of the century when the LDS Church had to back out completely out of Mexico due to political pressures. And
Is this Pancho Villa time?
yeah, like Pancho Villa time. And then when the church came back and reinserted itself into Mexico, the Mexican saints had been so used to governing their own affairs that they demanded that a Mexican mission president be installed. And of course, the church said no. And so they petitioned the church 3 times, and that's why they call themselves the Third Convention, because on the Third Convention, the third time that they met to make demands of Salt Lake, they decided to break away from Salt Lake.
See, this is why I love our conversations, because I didn't know we were going to talk about third convention, but this is awesome.
Well, me being Mexican, it's only natural, I guess. And there's books that are written on this. There's one that's called Mormons in Mexico that covers the Third Convention really well.
There's a woman who just wrote a book, Pulido, I think that's her name, Elise Pulido.
I've been meaning to read that.
Yeah, me too.
In fact, Thomas Murphy is the one who suggested that book to me.
Okay.
But I haven't had a chance to read it. The old book, Mormons in Mexico, had a particular LDS slant to it. For instance, they failed to mention that a lot of the Third Convention people persisted in living united order and plural marriage. It's absent in there. You can't find it in there. Yet that was an integral part of that movement. And so then what happened is that David O. McKay was sent, and he wooed them back to the church, and most of them. But there was like a caveat. They had to stop living plural marriage. They could, in essence, keep the wives that they had as long as they only cohabited with one wife. And my dad actually remembered. My dad served in Mexico, his mission. He actually remembered old plural couples from the Third Convention period attending church.
Okay, so this Third Convention, I'm trying to remember. Pancho Villa is like turn of the century. Like
Yeah, and The third convention, they broke off in like the 1930s. It was
Oh.
the 1930s.
Oh, I didn't realize
But
it was that late.
it all has its roots back to the Pancho Villa days.
Right,
That's when
right.
the church kind of had to be careful with what they were doing.
So that's interesting because the third manifesto was around the 1930s as well. So I can understand how the LDS Church would say, well, just live with one wife, support the other ones because we don't want them destitute. But yeah, because we're still trying to wind down polygamy church-wide, and now we've got this Mexican problem, or the third convention problem, I guess I should say. To me, that would be in keeping with what current policy was, although I know with the third manifesto, they were like, this has got to stop, but I can see how they would be a little softer on the third convention.
Yeah, well, they wanted to get those people back.
Yeah.
And it's a part of history that a lot of LDS people aren't aware of, a lot of fundamentalists aren't aware of. And I always tell them, I'm like, one of the last groups of people to live plural marriage in the LDS Church were the Mexican Third Convention Saints. You know? But not only that, I mean, the thing that I love is the last people to actually live polygamy in the LDS Church were the African saints, because they used to have a policy back when, I think until like 1985, that African converts who were already living plural marriage could keep the wives that they had.
Really?
Yeah, and then I think they put an end, they made a policy to put that to an end like around 1985. So actually, it was the African saints that were the last holdout of plural marriage in the LDS Church.
See, I knew that was a policy in the Community of Christ. I didn't know that was an LDS policy. Wow. Because David Osler, he wrote the book Bridges, and he was a mission president in Africa, and he was like, we just can't teach polygamists, period. Well, I should soften that a little bit, because he did tell me in that interview that they knew the child of a polygamist or polygamist family, and she couldn't be baptized, but she taught Sunday school.
Yeah. Well, from what I understand, I mean, 1978 to 1985, that's not a whole lot of time. I think that they realized really quick that they were going to have a problem if they persisted. So they would have had a whole slew of polygamous fundamentalist Mormons protesting the fact that, why are they allowed to stay in the church?
Yeah, and we can't.
But
that's interesting. I didn't know that. Wow.
So anyway, so back to the third convention really quick. There was a small group that refused to capitulate to the church's demands, and they left, and they established a colony down there in Osumba called Colonia Industrial. And
you're gonna have to spell that for me. I don't know. I can't do that in Spanish.
Industrial colony, basically.
Okay.
and they exist there to this day, and most of them have affiliation with the AUB, because what happened is that the fundamentalists, and this is a whole other story too, the fundamentalists used to have a prophecy that there was going to be a Lamanite prophet that was going to rise up down in Central America somewhere.
Oh.
And when they heard about what was going on in Osumba, they assumed this is that people.
Mm-hmm.
And so they traveled down to Mexico and made contact with them, thinking that this could be the people of prophecy.
Is this Bautista?
This is Margarito Bautista.
That's who that book is about, right?
Yes, I
Lisa
believe so.
Polito. Yeah.
So anyway, there was kind of like a convergence between the AUB, although they weren't called the AUB yet, the Allred group.
Right.
The Allred group and the people in Osumba. So they've had this relationship ever since then.
Do they have a temple down there? I think
Yes,
they
they do have a temple.
So that's in the Ozumba area?
Yeah, the only temple that the AUB has is actually the one in Osumba.
Yeah.
So what they have up here in Utah is an endowment house. It's not really a temple.
Do you know where that is?
I know exactly.
You can show me where it is?
I can show you.
I've been looking for it.
Oh, we'll have a conversation after this, because you can see it from the point of the mountain.
That's what somebody told me that, and I looked, but I couldn't I don't know where it is, but
Yeah, on the outside it looks just like a house.
Okay.
But and I'm sure
It's a
you and
big
Joe,
house.
I don't know if I don't remember if you and Joe Jessop talked about this or not.
No, it was a different polygamist that I'm trying to get on. I won't say his name, but he's from Centennial Park, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We need to get together. But yeah.
So anyway, back to what happened is that a lot of these Mexicans come up to the United States for work. And a lot of them gathered in the Phoenix area, a lot of these people from Osumba. And they eventually established a chapel over there, and there was enough of them there that they merited their own chapel. So my parents went, and you have to understand, my mother's from Mexico, my dad served a mission in Mexico. My dad naturally gravitated towards an assimilated Mexican culture. You know, like my sisters used to say about my dad, you know. Yeah, our mom is Mexican. Our dad wishes he was. So them attending a fundamentalist Spanish-speaking group
In Arizona.
was like heaven for them.
Yeah, I bet.
They loved it. They gravitated toward it, and of course, you know, it was hard for me because being with the independents up in Utah, I had heard a lot of bad thing about the Allreds.
Oh.
And so I kind of thought, you know, why are you getting involved with them? You know, why?
So we got some polygamous rivalries going on, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah. I mean, things are starting to change between some of the groups now, which we can talk about later.
Mm-hmm.
But back then, it was like there was no mixing. It's like
no mixing of groups?
No mixing of groups. You know, there was a very sharp divide between all of them. And those lines were very rarely ever crossed, even if there was family ties. So my parents got involved with the AUB,
So this is like 1990-ish?
Yeah, around like 1991.
Okay.
That's when we wound up joining.
We?
Yeah. Well, what happened is that
we includes you?
Yeah, includes me. My parents invited me to a meeting, and I remember thinking, gosh, they just like them because they're Mexican, you know. And so we went to a meeting in Bluffdale, which Bluffdale is like their main chapel, their big building. It looks like a big warehouse, except they have a stage and a podium and a bunch of like fold-out chairs.
Okay.
You know. So we went, and, you know, I'm only 20 years old. You know, I'm thinking like a 20-year-old. You know, I'd heard that the Allreds had really good-looking girls, you know. And so I'm scoping out who's the best-looking girl here. And the person that I settled on was the one that you just met.
Oh, okay.
Eventually became my wife.
Okay.
But
so she's an Allred girl.
Yeah, she was actually raised in the AUB.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So we...
Can we say who that is? Or how she's your wife?
Yeah, she's my wife, Andrea.
Okay.
Yeah, she's my wife.
We joked we were going to talk about her, but we won't.
Oh, it's a good thing she doesn't have access to my TikTok because I talk about her all the time. And she probably won't listen to this. But anyway, so... my parents asked us to fast and pray about whether we should join, and I subsequently had already been fasting when my parents asked this, so I just continued my fast. And the answer that I got was unusual. You know, the answer that I got was that out of all the groups out there, that the AUB was the closest in order, but that they were still out of order.
Oh.
And that I would be required to leave one day.
Oh, wow.
So
let me make sure. So the whole independent thing, I think, is really interesting. I mean, I know Anne. It sounds like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if somebody got their second anointing, which includes the sealing power, excommunication is irrelevant to them. And so a lot of the independents were people who had a second anointing and then probably got excommunicated, and they were like, who cares? It doesn't matter. And so they would pass on priesthood to other independents. Is that how it works?
That's true with some of the independents. And that's particularly true with the independents I associate with now. But this particular set of independents, all right, they had become independents back when the FLDS and the AUB, the Short Creek group and the Allred group split apart.
Which is in the 50s.
Which is in the 50s. And by this time, you have to remember, temple work really wasn't prevalent with the fundamentalists. They used to send their children to the LDS Church to take out their endowments.
Right.
So eventually what happened is you had a whole generation of fundamentalists who were brought up who knew nothing about the endowment, nothing about the second anointing, nothing about the temple ceremonies at all. And I remember that was one of the things that kind of my dad didn't like, because he had been such a temple-going Mormon that he came among the fundamentalists. And he immediately saw that they weren't functioning or participating or even knew about that part of Mormonism. Those independents didn't know anything about it.
Well, because I heard, especially the AUB, but I think other groups as well, would say, hey, go join the LDS Church, go on a mission, go get sealed in the temple, and then come to us. So are you saying that their exposure to temple work was just, I mean, if you just go one time, you're not going to remember everything.
Right.
And so because of that, like they got their endowment, they got their sealing, and then they didn't remember much, and so temple work wasn't as big of a deal to them as it should,
exactly.
As your dad thinks it should have been.
Exactly. So, and I mean, there's a whole narrative behind that as well too. One of the things that my dad liked about the AUB is that they were doing temple work.
Oh,
but
only in Mexico though.
Only in Mexico, and then they also did the work in the endowment house
in Draper,
in Bluffdale.
Bluffdale.
But the thing is that they had not been doing that either. So back in the old days, a lot of them, like Owen Allred, they had been through the endowment in the church.
Right.
And this goes along with what we're talking about the whole 1978 thing. Because what happened is that in the old days, Rulon Allred, the only thing that he used to do as far as temple work was concerned was that he would place the old-style garments on people who had not received them.
Okay, they go to the wrists and the ankles.
Yes, so he would place garments on people, and that was about the extent of what he would do. But there was an assumption then that you could get them from the church. That's not our responsibility. 1978.
Is this why they ask for temple recommends now when you buy garments? It must be. Because you guys wouldn't have the correct temple recommend.
Right. So 1978, when the priesthood ban was lifted in the church, there was a question that arose among the fundamentalists. Can we send our children still to the LDS Church if they are administering endowments to those who are of African descent also? Right. So they started, it took them a few years to ponder this, but they started thinking, well, what should we do about it? So what the Allred Council did is in 1981, they met together in Crescent, Utah. I'm not sure where it is, but that's what it says on the paperwork because I have copies of the paperwork. Crescent, Utah, they got together. They those who had been endowed in the church met in a separate room dressed in the robes of the priesthood and prayed in the true order. Those who had not been endowed just met in another room and prayed in their street clothes, regular clothes. And then what they did is that they all wrote down their thoughts on whether they should start temple work. And they were all in consensus that they should start doing temple work. And then after that, Owen Allred received a revelation. And it's very short, but it basically, in it, the Lord is telling them, I've waited for you a long time to come to me in this manner. And inasmuch as I cannot accept the blessings of my house, I don't know the exact wording, but go forward and begin the work of my house.
So basically the LDS Church is in apostasy. We're giving it to you, Owen.
Yeah.
So, and I guess the relationship for people who don't know, Rulon Allred, Owen Allred were brothers.
We're brothers, yes.
Rulon was killed in 1977.
1977, correct.
Shot by Ervil LeBaron's, one of his wives.
Yeah.
Assassinated, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And then Owen took over the AUB.
Yes.
Okay.
So what they did then, they spent the next couple of years assembling the endowment, and there's a lot of stories and a lot of I've heard versions from other people, like we were just talking before we started recording about Robert Black. Robert Black had copies of the endowment. They went to him. They went to Fred Collier. They got some copies from the church. So basically, what they assembled was from various sources was their closest version to the 1877 St. George Temple ceremony that they did. And they built an endowment house, and
is this the one in Bluffdale, or a different one?
Yes, the one in Bluffdale.
Okay.
So they hadn't built the temple in Osumba yet. So they built this endowment house, and when they did their first endowment, we're talking like this is the late 80s. Owen Allred had not been through a temple ceremony since the 1920s. And when they
Wow.
So when they did the temple endowment, Owen Allred started to weep, and he said, I remember this, And so that time on, they started gradually performing the endowment. They started building the temple down in Wasumba, but it wasn't without drama, because it's like I know some of the people that built that temple, and they had to fight every step of the way, because in the AUB council there were two mindsets. There was a mindset that, yes, we need to perpetuate everything that the church isn't able to. We need to perpetuate the endowment. We have to perpetuate all the blessings of the temple. And then there were some that argued, the only commission that we were given when we were set apart to be separate from the church by Lauren Woolley was to perpetuate plural marriage, nothing else. So there was actually two mindsets that still prevail to this day in the AUB. From what I heard, I haven't been a member of the AUB for years, but I still hear that that's still an issue, that there are some that are proponents of temple work, and some that are not. So
do you guys do temple work for the dead then? So baptisms and endowments?
Yes.
And sealings?
And sealings.
Okay.
Everything that you do in a temple, we do. But we do. I'm an independent, so I don't have anywhere where I do that right now.
We're jumping ahead again.
Yeah. So the dedication of the temple in Osumba, for a lot of people, reportedly, I wasn't there, but a lot of people report that it was a Pentecostal type of event. A lot of people had their dead relatives come to them in the temple. There was one incident that after they had the first session at the temple, they went to go turn the lights out. And when they got out of the temple, they said, you forgot to turn the lights out, because they could see lights inside. But when they went in, the lights were out, So there's a lot of stories like that. So I don't remember the exact year that the temple in Osumba was dedicated. I think it was either 89 or 90. And I was actually talking about this with somebody, I think with Christina Rossetti, and we were trying to figure out the exact date, and I couldn't remember it. But my parents got invited by the AUB council to go to Osumba, and like I said, they were in heaven. They were down in Mexico, my dad's old missionary stomping grounds, in a temple, and they were in cloud nine. And but I guess that a lot of people had trouble with my family because of our association with the independents before we became members of the AUB.
Oh, because I guess your dad was kind of an independent before he joined the AUB. Okay.
And so they called us. One of the council members called us, and it was one of the AUB Jessop council members.
Oh.
Called us flash.
Your cousin.
In the pan. Yeah, called us flash in the pan independents, and they're not going to last,
Oh.
And I remember that when I got engaged to Andrea, that one of the AUB council members came up and basically told me, he said, it was right around the weekend that we were getting married. He said, I just want you to know that I had to talk really hard to get your marriage to go through in council meeting.
Oh, boy.
And I remember thinking, what's the problem? Why was there even a problem? But apparently some people had problems with it. And
Because of your independent past and she was AUB and
yes.
you were polluting the line?
Yeah, something like, or I think that I was, I don't know. There's a sense of reluctance all the way through fundamentalism in giving other people blessings. And it seems to be
people outside the group.
Yeah, people outside. They're really slow. Yeah, almost like you have to prove yourself. For instance, for those who are endowed, they know that the endowment is divided up into to Moronic portion and Melchizedek portion. Back in the old days, John Taylor and some of the others were talking about dividing up the endowment into, only the Aaronic portion and then afterwards the Melchizedek portion. However, John Taylor, I believe, was talking about doing this separation to empower their Aaronic priesthood, to give more power to their Aaronic priesthood. But the way the AUB was talking about dividing it up, and I don't think they ever did, but they were talking about it, that, we'll give you the Aaronic portion, and then you have to prove yourself worthy. That was kind of like the mindset.
So you'd get the Aaronic portion, then get sealed, and then get the Melchizedek? Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah, they were going to divide up into sections, and you had to prove yourself,
Oh, that's interesting.
And by the way, it was kind of this mindset that eventually led to us splitting from the AUB, but I'm getting ahead of myself again.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with punk rock polygamist Moroni Jessop. In our next conversation, we're going to tackle the topic of racism as he found in a couple of different fundamentalist groups. So they wouldn't even allow baptism?
No.
Oh, wow.
No. And that baffled me even then.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, subscribe on either Patreon or at gospeltangents.com. For just $5 a month, you can hear the entire audio uninterrupted. On our $10 tier, if you would like to see the whole video, you can see that either on youtube.com/gospeltangents, or I've got a special Facebook group devoted for full videos. So subscribe at gospeltangents.com and sign up for just $10 a month. For $20 a month, if you'd like to get some bonus content, maybe some of the stuff that ended up on the cutting room floor, you can sign up for that. And then if you'd like to talk to me for $100 a month, we'll do a monthly phone call on something like Zoom, and you can ask me anything you want. So thanks again. Also, don't forget about the merch, mugs, t-shirts, hats, things like that. I'm trying to get the ties up there. Hopefully I can get up there. And thanks again for watching Gospel Tangents, and click here for some more videos.